When we left off last time, we saw that we can, like we do here, and like we do here, print the values of variables to the screen. What I'm going to show you in this particular video is a couple of different techniques you might use. So let's get rid of a whole bunch of stuff. And let's say that instead of hello world, what we want to do is output to the screen hello, then a comma, and then our user's name, and then an exclamation point. So let's say we want to do that. So we get into insert mode, we create a string called username, which in this case might be something like Veronica. And down here, what we want to print is the phrase hello Veronica. So we've got our hello, and then a comma, and then a space. And if we're using the old way of doing things, what we might have to do is put all of this in its own line. So we'll do System.out.print, leave the cursor exactly where it is, then another System.out.print, and then we'll print our username, and then another System.out.print, except this time it'll be a print line, where we put an exclamation point, and then eventually a new line character. If we do it this way, then these three lines of code will make sure that whatever username we put in here ends up getting printed. And later we'll talk about how to get the username from the user, him or her or herself, but for right now let's just hard code, and we'll see what happens here. This is the first technique we can use for printing variables to the screen, where we just have each thing in its own print statement. It's not the most efficient, but we can definitely do it. And if we're careful about how we use the System.out.print and the System.out.print line commands, we can achieve a reasonable modicum of control over the output. So we'll compile, and then once it's done compiling, we'll run it. When we run it, we see hello Veronica, just the way that we planned. And now what you might be thinking to yourself, and this is going to be pretty common in this course, is, hey, wait a second, there's got to be a faster way to do this. One technique we might use, here's our first technique, which is putting everything in its own, all the different parts in their own lines. So we've got our string literal, our string variable, and then another string literal. The second technique we can use is that concatenation with the plus operator, like what we saw in the last video. And that'll look something like this. We go System.out.print line, and we'll just make a new line here. Hello, comma, space, and then we'll use plus. We'll get that username in there, and then another plus, and we'll get our exclamation point in. And so remember, with the concatenation operator, because these are strings, so all this plus signs here and here, all that they're going to do is stick these strings together. So we have one contiguous string, which means that the output from this section is going to look a lot like the output from that section. Now the tricky thing here is that we have to make sure that we're really careful about where we put our spaces, just like we do here, and just like we do up here, because if we don't, we'll end up with words smushed together in ways that maybe we don't want. Which is to say that when we concatenate strings, Java doesn't put spaces where we would put them. Java just sticks the strings together with no space between them. So we see method 1, where we have everything in its own print command, and then we see method 2, which is everything on a single line, where we put our string literals, that's the stuff in quotation marks, and our variables, which we're not in quotation marks, together using the concatenation operator. So we'll save and quit. We'll save and quit here. Then we'll compile. This is going to be a pretty familiar cycle, and then we'll run it. And what we'll see here, this is the first one. This is where we have those three print statements all in a row. And here's the second one. This is just one print statement with concatenation. Now, and again, and this is going to be a common theme, there is an even easier way to roll with this. There's an even easier way to make this happen, where what we can do is, instead of worrying about our concatenation operators, which are going to be kind of a pain, what we can instead do is use that third print statement, what we call the printf command. And that looks like this. We go System.out.printf. Make another new line. Hello. Then we'll put this colon, or this percentage sign S, followed by our exclamation point, followed by our closing quotation marks, and then the username. And what's going to happen here? This is what we call a format character. A percentage followed by a letter. And sometimes there are a couple of flags in there, but for right now we're just going to worry about letters. And what this does is Java looks at this with the print formatter and says, hey, this has got to be a string, because that %s, the S stands for string, and so it looks over in the argument list, which is everything right after this comma here, and pulls the very first thing, and then if it's a string, we stick it in there. And if it's not a string, we crash our program, and then we have to go back and figure out how to make it not crash. But for right now, we know that this is going to work. This is the printf. This %s is just going to be a placeholder. And there are a couple of other placeholders that we can use too. And then what Java does is it looks and it finds, for the very first format sequence, it looks at the very first argument after this comma-separated list and says, hey, that's a string. I'm going to put it there. Maybe in not so many words, but that's about how it works. So we'll save and quit, and then what we'll see with all of this is that it still works the way that we want it to. So we'll compile, we'll run, and we can see down here, this is that third one. This is the printf command, and we forgot to put a new line here, which is why all of this is bunched together. But we see that it still works. And with printf, we can get actually really fancy if we want to. And I'll show you that here in just a second. So we're going to get rid of these lines of code. And now we just have this printf command. But we're going to add a couple more variables. So we can even go, we'll have a string called greeting, which we'll put that as hello. And we can modify this later if we want to. And then we'll have, let's say, an integer. We'll have an integer which we'll call year. Right now it's 2014, so we'll just make that 2014. This will be where we start for right now. Now we can modify our printf command in a way that ends up getting kind of exciting. Okay, so we want to say, we want to have our greeting, and then a comma, and then the person's name, and then an exclamation point, and then maybe we tell Veronica what year it is, just in case she's actually a time traveler. And so what that'll look like is we'll have our greeting, and then the name, then an exclamation point, and then the year is, and for numbers, specifically for integers, we use %d. The D stands for decimal integer, base 10 integer. And then we'll put in a new line character at the end of that. And now what we have to do is we have these three format characters, and we have to make sure that after this we put a comma and then our three arguments. So our first argument is going to be our greeting, our second argument is going to be the username, and our third argument, I'm just going to go down and make a new line here, is going to be the year. And the cool thing about Java right now is that unless you're in the middle of a string literal, it doesn't actually care about white space. So we can have, after all these commas, if we want to, we can have just a little bit of space. We can go down to the next line if that makes things a little bit easier to read. In this case it does, which is kind of useful, but we can do that. Alright. So we'll close our parentheses, stick a semicolon at the end of that, because that's what we need to do with every command with Java. Stick a semicolon at the end. And then we'll save and quit. And what Java's going to do when we run this is it's going to take that %s, turn it into hello. So we're going to take greeting, which is the very first argument, and stick it into the first format sequence. We'll take this %s, which is going to go with name. That's going to be Veronica. And then this %d, that's going to be our number, which is going to go with the year, and we just go right in order. Okay, so we'll save and quit. We'll compile, and then what we'll see when we run this is, hello Veronica, the year is 2014. You see that just right here. And again, that was a string format sequence, another string format sequence, and then a number. Java figured out all of that automatically for us based on how we wrote this printf statement using the print formatter. We took these conversion sequences and we turned them into the corresponding arguments in this list. We just have to make sure that for every conversion sequence we use, the corresponding argument is of the right type and is the thing that we want. And with printf, as we get better at it over the course of the semester, you'll be able to do quite a bit, which ends up being really exciting. You can very, very finely control exactly how text outputs to the screen. For right now, we're going to head back to the slides real fast. So with precise control, we use the System.out.printf, and everywhere we have these conversion sequences, that percent and then a letter, we're going to take whatever argument is there and place it. And the three conversion sequences that I want you to know right now are %s, that's a percent sign followed by a lowercase s, which just takes a string, or a thing that can be turned into a string, and puts it there. There's the %d, which is a base 10 integer. And if you're feeling fancy, you can use %S, which is an all caps string. It takes all the letters and it turns them uppercase. So we could even do that if we're feeling particularly fancy. And I'm not going to show you that. That's a thing that you can experiment with on your own. But it's certainly a thing that we can do. When we come back, here in this next video, I'll show you how to get input from the user using the scanner. See you in a bit.